Okay, all good.
Good, good. Steve Luongo, how you doing today, man?
Very well, Brian. How are you?
Very good, very good. I guess your career started all with Rat Race Choir or before that?
Well, there was not much happening before that. I mean, I was in a couple of different things, but yeah, it basically started with Rat Race Choir, the career that did anything. There were well, it's funny. The bass player of Rat Race and I were in a band called the Continentals back
Uh-huh.
in like the early '60s, but that doesn't really count. So yeah, basically, it started with Rat Race.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I know I still got them and I got it was called the Aquarian back then.
Yeah,
But
I remember the
right,
Aquarian.
right. And like you guys were in there all the time,
Yeah.
shows and pictures and everything else. So like I still got all them. I'm not young either. So I'll be 66 this year. So
Okay, well, you're doing. It looks like you're doing pretty good for 66. That's
yeah,
a good thing.
yeah. So like, I still flip through them Aquarians and look at saying, oh, look how this guy, and like even the band Pantera, they were all glam back then, and they changed a lot. So it's just amazing how music fans focus on different things and stuff like that. So Rat Race Choir, you were playing how many times a week out?
Well, we were. I mean, in the we would play as many days of the week as anybody would have us. We were at in the prime time. We were playing 6 nights a week, 52 weeks a year. So, and there were some 21 day in a row stretches with 22 gigs in them. For me, Mondays, which was usually the day off, I'd just pace back and forth in my room waiting for Tuesday. So
Right.
it was. Yeah. I mean, we used to play like 300 nights a year, and um, it was great. It was a great way to learn about every aspect of the business and hone our skills as musicians and as bandmates, because that was probably the biggest takeaway, was performing with other musicians and
Right.
figuring out how to do that to the best of your ability.
Cool, cool. What venues were your favorites? Mine was a place called Mother's.
Oh, Mothers. I remember Mothers well. I remember Les Paul came to see us once at Mothers in Wayne, New Jersey.
Right.
See?
Exactly.
And I loved Mothers. I liked Speaks, the big hammerheads,
Right.
not the little hammerheads, but the big hammerheads.
Uh-huh.
Detroit's was always fun. Lemoore was a
Yeah.
great place to
Yeah.
play. I mean, there were just, and Glen Island Casino, which we did every Tuesday night, which was fantastic. There were like multiple bands there, and on a Tuesday, it was just amazing. So yeah, that was a great place to play. And there were, other places around uh, the states, and David's in Manchester, Connecticut was a good place to play. Whenever we did colleges or schools, high schools or anything like that, those were always great because the rooms always had that, that big echoey gymnasium
Right.
sound,
Yeah.
and we sounded good in there. It was, I can't say there's a lot of places that I didn't like playing. I mean, some of the
Right.
smaller gas dates were frustrating,
Right.
but all in all, you're playing in a rock band. You can't complain.
Yeah. 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 I remember back in the day, I got to see Rick Derringer in a gymnasium, in Jersey, and it's amazing. It was when what that Hoochie Coo song came out. It was like, everybody wanted to see him, and he's playing like a high school gym. You know.
Yeah, I played with Rick in a couple of different situations. Great player. He's just a lifer. Like I refer all guys that just do it, whether it's up or down, in or out. And Rick is one of those guys that just always up for a gig, always ready to play, no matter what, at a stadium or a steakhouse.
Cool, cool. So, what was your special moment being in Rat Race Choir?
My special moment being in Rat Race Choir. Well, there were several, obviously. I mean, I
Right.
was in the band for 30 years.
Yeah.
Um, my special moment, first special moment, when you think about your rock and roll dreams, and I always, this is the only thing I ever have done for my life. And in primary school, I knew that it was what I wanted to do somehow. It was one of those epiphany type of things. So my brother was 8 years older than I was, and we grew up in White Plains, New York. And there was a club called the 4 and F South. And my brother, as an 18-year-old, when I was 10, used to go to the 4 and F South. And by the time I was 10 or 11, I was playing. I was playing in some kind of a band, maybe it was the Continentals with our bass player or, whatever it was, but I was playing it by that time. And my big dream was to be able to play at the 4 and F South.
Right.
And when we finally played there, that would certainly have been a benchmark. There were so many. I remember we had in the halcyon years, we had a house in the Hamptons. We always, once we got big enough to be able to buy things besides our, pay our own bills, we had a house in the Hamptons. We had a house in Baldwin Place, a horse farm in Baldwin Place. And those places, being able to rehearse, being able to wake up in the morning, and I'm using that figure, and have your gear set up in the living room, just go and play and write music. That was incredible. And then go to the beach. It was like the perfect rock and roll story. Play music, all night, go to the beach and do whatever all day, and then repeat, and so those were great times. I think there were, it was funny. We did a couple of battles of the bands when we were kids. We never won, we never won. But doing those things and playing with other bands, I think the nature of the band was competitive. So if you were going to play with us, you were going to play with the best we had. It was like a gunfight at the old OK Corral. Right. Those were all great moments. And, all of the innovations. I remember my first drum solo at Pearl River High School. We were playing at junior high school. I don't remember what it was in New York though. And I had a 4-piece set of Slingerland sparkling champagne drums, right? A 20-inch bass drum, a 9x13, a 16x16, and the snare drum. And the guy down the street from me, really a half a block away, had almost the exact set, except he had the smaller rack tom and the smaller floor tom. And I'm getting ready to go and play Pearl River, and I run into him, and he says, "Hey man, I'm looking to sell my drum set." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, it was the same finish as mine." I said, "I'll take it. How much do you want?" I think he asked me for $100. I gave him $100. And now all of a sudden, I've got a double bass drum kit with 2 rack toms, 2 floor toms, and I'm ready to do my first drum solo.
All right, yeah.
So I tell the guys, and this is 68, I said to the guys, "Listen, when we do Light My Fire tonight, I'm going to do a drum solo." And they said, "Oh, okay." And we do Light My Fire, everybody takes their solo, and then the band stops, and I'm doing my solo, and I lift my head up, and the band is leaving, heading towards the parking lot, and they went to McDonald's and got burgers and fries, and then came back. So it was I don't even know how long the solo was, but I'm not sure if they were trying to deter me or encourage me, but that was certainly a real pinnacle moment for me. And as I love soloing, so that was an interesting way to get into that whole thing. And they didn't bring me back not a burger or a milkshake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was drums always your passion?
Yeah. I remember. I remember the instant. I'm still friends with a girl that we grew up with named Janice, and we all went to elementary school together. And she reminded me, maybe 20 years ago, that she remembered us having an assembly in our elementary school. I think we were in kindergarten. It was kindergarten through 6th grade. And the high school band was going to come and play for our school. Right. And my mother had me all hyped up about what a great band it was. She knew, she was always into music, and she knew the conductor as an incredibly talented guy, Al Renino. And she said, "Oh, you're really going to enjoy this. It's going to be incredible, And it would be my first experience with live music. I guess I was 5.
Mhm.
And I remember being in the auditorium, and Janice actually reminded me of this. I probably, in the sea of memories,
Right.
lost. And I remember being in the room in the auditorium. We were in the balcony, so we were in the back of the hall. And when the band started playing, it was a drum percussion section. So there was a
Right.
snare drummer, a bass drum, cymbals, but all separate guys. And when I heard the sound of the snare drum echoing in that hall, the sound of it with all
Right.
the amps of a gymnasium, I turned to Janice and I said, "That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life."
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know what the rest of my life meant.
Yeah.
But so that's when it hit me. I never wanted to be a guitar player. I mean, I play guitar and I play keyboards. My mother played piano. So I've had all that exposure, but I never wanted to pursue anything with any great,
Right.
feel but drums. And from that moment on, Janice reminded me that I used to come to school with drumsticks in my back pocket, and show and tell would be, look at this new cymbal, or look at. So that was, yeah, it was always drums, and man, I just couldn't learn enough fast enough.
Right.
And in my elementary school, you couldn't take lessons until 4th grade. So by
Right.
the time 4th grade came around, I was already playing. My family had gotten me a small set, and I went through all those basic things, and yeah, that was it for me, man. I mean, I just wanted to do that, and I felt like I could do it. It's not like I was struggling to
Right.
do something. It was fun, and I was pretty good at it, so I just pursued it.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Now you work with so many, top artists and stuff, Leslie West and Wilson and everything else. How do they contact you to like be part of their band, or do you audition, or how's that work?
Well, no, they're all different. I mean, you take Ann Wilson, working with her. I worked with her and Todd Rundgren and Alan Parsons and John Entwistle all on the same tour. That was a tour called A Walk Down Abbey Road. And what we did was we all did 3 of our own songs, and then three of our, like, we did 3 Heart songs, 3 Todd songs, so on and so forth. And then the second half of it was all Beatles songs, which was amazing because Ann is just such an incredible vocalist, and
Right.
she loves all that classic ground. I never heard her hit a bad note in that whole year, and
Yeah.
incredible. So that just happened because I happened to be business partners and musical partners with John Entwistle from The Who. And so I was contacted initially by the promoter of that tour, who asked me if John would do the tour.
Right.
And there was never a thought of me doing the tour. They wanted John. I think they wanted Mick Fleetwood on drums. So I rang John up and I said, "Listen, I got an offer for you to do this thing called A Walk Down Abbey Road." And first thing he said was, "Who's playing drums?" And I said, "Well, they're talking about Mick Fleetwood." And he went, "Not interested." And I said, "Okay, and he said, "Why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, what am I going to do? Call up the guy and say, 'Hey, I spoke to Entwistle, but he won't do it unless I do it,'" which
Right.
ultimately was what happened, and so I wound up doing the tour with Todd, and I became great friends with everybody, still friends to this day. So that's how that happened. Leslie West, how that happened, incredible. I mean, I had known Leslie because we were from the same part of the world. He was from Queens, I was from
Right.
Westchester, and loved Mountain. In fact, Rat Race opened for Mountain the day before they went to Woodstock to
Right.
play that gig. We played with them at Highlands Junior High School, and I was a huge Mountain and Leslie West fan, and I loved the way Corky played. The whole thing was just great. So we were aware of each other, but we had never, crossed paths professionally or, socially. And then when I did the NAMM show in 1987, which is where I first met Entwistle, and we jammed at the Vic Theater, Leslie came up to me and said, "Here's my phone number, give me a call." And that's how that started.
Right.
And like Jack Bruce, that was a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing. that started with a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing. Again, I was called, asking if I would put my friends together.
Right.
Same thing with the guys from AC/DC, Cliff and Brian. I had moved to Florida. I had experienced my first hurricane 13 days after I showed up here.
Wow.
And I'm from New York. Come at me with a gun or a knife, I can deal with that. Weather, I don't do weather. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when my house wasn't destroyed and my studio wasn't, taken up like the Wizard of Oz, I said, that's it, hurricane relief concert.
Right.
And so that's how I met Cliff Williams and Brian Johnson. And I became friends with Cliff, and because Cliff was like a neighbor of mine. And if you're in a town like we were in Fort Myers, there's not a huge musical community down there. You're in the city, you can always go to a club or whatever and hang. But down there, when you find another guy that does what you do, it's like, it's like an oasis. So Cliff and I became great friends, and I said to him, if you ever want to jam, my guitar player lives in New York. And he said, my singer lives in Sarasota, which is, just an hour and a half up the road.
Right.
And AC/DC hadn't done an album in 6 years, and he asked me if I wanted, if I was interested in doing a record. And Brian, Mark Hitt, the guitar player, and I wrote, I don't know, maybe 10 tracks, and we went into the studio. I produced the sessions, and it was fantastic. We did a tour behind it. So everything that the only band there's two bands that I remember auditioning for. One, I got the gig, and the other I didn't. Mm-hmm. The first one was Blue Oyster Cult. Now I knew Buck as a friend for years, because they, again, same area and coming up at the same time. And I didn't get that gig, I was told, by the person who recommended me for it, because I was too tall, which
I believe it.
I'm 6'3",
yeah.
and and that's why I didn't get that gig. And the other gig that I auditioned for was Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow.
Right. Yeah.
And, got that one, but that didn't last very long because the chemistry, it's a big long story, but the chemistry just wasn't there. I did one track on Bent Out of Shape, I think was the album, and it's just, it just wasn't there. Musically, it was fine, and I'm still friends with everybody else in that band, Joe Lynn Turner, Roger Glover, Dave Rosenthal, but Ritchie and I just kind of didn't dance well together.
Cool. Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn. I lived in Queens, and then I moved to Jersey. But the same thing, we're the East Coast people. I went to photograph Rocklahoma, and they had a tornado. It knocked down the stage. They told us to run. The tents were in the air. I was shitting my pants.
Do I remember that from the news?
Yes.
Did that make?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Trickster was just about going on stage, and the stage is gone. Completely gone. I got all pictures because I'm a photographer too. So everything's gone. Everything.
It's crazy. I mean, the things that happen, I can imagine. The only time I ever came anywhere close to anything like that is we were on the tour bus one time, and I felt the bus pulling over. We were on an interstate, and we pulled over underneath an overpass, and I went up and said to the bus driver, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, there's a little," I forget what he called, some crazy, Southern name for whatever, a twister or something. Yeah. And sure enough, we looked out the window and you could see this thing in the distance. Yeah. And we waited till it passed and then just, took off.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me a little bit about this album, Torquay.
Oh, Torque, the Torque album. Yeah. It's funny. I made the Q big so that I could copyright the name without getting sued by mechanical companies. That's, out of all the records that I've done, probably the most satisfying record. That was Mark Hitt and I, who was the guitar player from '74 in Rat Race Choir. We had both. I was playing with John Entwistle. Right. And John had, they were going to do a Who tour. So I had the summer. Now John and I were business partners, so we were always working on whatever the next project would be. So even if the Who went out, and I didn't, there was always things that we did together, I was either setting up whatever, any number of things. But I knew that I thought that I had the summer off, and I had reconnected with Mark. I hadn't seen him in quite a few years because I was touring and I was spending a lot of time overseas and so on. And it turned up that Mark was living not far from where I was living in the mountains. And I said, let's get together. I had a small studio in that house. I said, let's see what we come up with. And we started writing, and all of those songs, I forget how many songs are on that record, but all those songs are, Mark and I wrote them all together, except for When You See the Light was a solo track of mine. But it was that album, in my mind, was what Rat Race Choir should have done and never did.
Right.
Not that we didn't record, and it wasn't that we, but we didn't have that, we didn't get that product out there.
Right, yeah.
So, and it was, there's a reason for that. Rat Race, if you remember, we were pretty progressive, even though we did, some pop songs. We did Sarah Smile and Elton John and whatever else. We were also doing Birds of Fire and Thick as a Brick. So we were all over the place. And our originals were abstract, to say the least.
Right.
And at the time that we were looking for a deal, we didn't get one. We couldn't get one. We had some interest from Atlantic, but it just wasn't, the planets didn't line up. And I was always frustrated because I believed that our brand of music, which we called super rock, I believed that it was as unique as anything else out there. It wasn't like Led Zeppelin or like Pink Floyd or like Emerson and Lake and Palmer, but it was that unique. Jethro Tull, if we had gotten our chance to put our sound out there, I think it would have been that unique. So Torque, 103 103 was Mark and I, which we were two of the main writers in the band. The bass player Dave wrote as well. Keyboard player didn't write at all, but Mark and I were probably the most prolific. We just started churning out songs, and it was, you would think to do an album like that would be months and months and months, and it wasn't. The songs came so fast, and it was such a natural thing. And it's probably because we had all those years of whatever was built up, and then finally we had a way to get those things out there, and found a great studio and great musicians that played on that. Jeff Gans on bass and Chris Clark on keyboards, one of the most phenomenal keyboard players I've ever played with, and Jeff as well. I mean, everybody was a first-class musician. So that record was that was a dream for me. It was a record I always wanted to make. Would I have liked it to have been Led Zeppelin 2? Yeah, I certainly would have. But whenever I listen to it, there's a great deal of satisfaction in the fact that we did it and it exists. And how much it sold or didn't sell was irrelevant, compared to the fact that I had finally done this musical thing that I guess I was always wanting to do.
Cool. Tell me how it was working with Robin Zander.
Robin's great. I mean, and interesting. You asked me about auditioning and this and that. When after Entwistle passed away and I moved to Florida, I had started, when John was alive, I had started a documentary film. We were gonna, what's his name? Bill Kreutzmann's son. Bill Kreutzmann was the drummer for the Grateful Dead. Called me up, Justin Kreutzmann, and he said, I'd love to do a music video for the John Entwistle Band. And I said, well, we don't have anything to support. There's no, there's not like we had a new record out or anything like that. I said, but excuse me, if I think of something, I'll ring you up. And so I called John and I said, I got a call, blah, 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 blah. And he said, well, let's do something. So now it was up to me to invent something to do. And he was actually getting ready to go out. I forget what year it was where we started it. Excuse me. And he was getting ready to go out, in like 3 months on a Who tour. I think maybe it was 89, maybe it was, I don't know, whatever. It was early on in the Who getting back together. And I said, well, I'm so used to gearing up for a tour, right? I
Right.
mean, there's a whole process that you go through. First, you find out there's a tour, then you
Right.
find out where it's going, then you, if you're me or if you're Entwistle, you start working on your rig. You know, what am I going to play on this tour? What things? And then you work on your wardrobe, and then it's like a whole process. And
Right.
I thought, well, this would be very interesting. It's kind of like an old soldier going back out to war, getting the weapons and getting the uniform, and it's like they call you, you go, and there's no other questions asked.
Right.
It's just what it is. So I thought that would make a very interesting documentary,
Mhm.
and so Justin and I flew to England, and we spent, I don't remember how many days we spent at John's, and it was really just John and I talking. We tried getting drunk, we tried getting stoned, we tried getting this, so we tried, everything, just telling stories back and forth. And I got about 10 hours of footage, and the guys that were financing it just fell apart. They didn't have the money they said they had, and blah blah blah. And I had creative control, and all the balls were in my court, and we never finished the film. But years later, I got contacted by Icon Entertainment, who told me they had seen some of the footage and was I interested in completing the film. And I said, well, I mean, John's dead now, so it'd be a very different film.
Right.
And I wound up calling people that I knew to be in the film. Pete
Right.
Townsend did it, Chris Squier did it, Roger Glover did it, Billy Squier did it, a bunch of people, Ray Manzarek from The Doors, and Robin Zander. I was in Florida, and somehow, I can't remember what the connection was, but his people found out that I was doing the film, and actually Zander was one of the people that John and I considered as a vocalist for the John Entwistle band.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I met Robin, and Robin and I became friends, and we're in Florida, and he said, let's go play golf, or let's go do a fundraiser, or let's go do this and that. And one day he just rang me up and said, listen, let's put a band together. And I said, okay, who do you want to use? He said, well, let's use your guys, which was Larry Hobbs on bass and Mark Hitt on guitar. And I said, okay. And we toured the country nationally in between Cheap Trick dates for 3 years. And it was
Wow.
just fun, man. I mean, it was like being, when you're in the business, if you have any kind of success, if you're fortunate enough, and I don't mean monetary, I mean,
Right.
if you have the longevity of a career that people keep calling, or you keep getting gigs, it starts to fall into a pattern. And when you get to a chance to break that pattern, if you're John Entwistle, you're playing Who songs every night.
Right.
If you're Zander, Cheap Trick, Buck is Blue Oyster Cult. But this band, the Robin Zander band, and he didn't want to call it that. I said, Robin, we have to call it that, because if you make up a name, right, if we're like the Tumbleweeds, they're just going to say featuring Robin Zander of Cheap Trick.
Right.
So, and it was the same thing with Entwistle. He didn't want to call it the John Entwistle band, but marquee value being what it is. And, so he listened to me, John listened to me, and we put the Robin Zander band together, and we played Cheap Trick songs, but we also played Led Zeppelin, we played stuff by The Who, we played Beatles. It was like being in your childhood band, where it's, hey man, you guys know this one? Yeah, sure, well, cool. And it was loose, and it was fun, and it was very reminiscent of the earliest days of being in a rock band. It was great.
Cool. Tell me a little bit about Naples Art Association, Steve Luongo design.
Oh, okay. After John passed, besides the fact that I had the Torque the band with Mark and those guys, I relocated to Florida. I just kind of needed to change things on, because when you lose somebody, John was my best friend. I can't even go into all of the spaces that he occupied in my life, from business to to social. I mean, he was just, we'd call each other up on the phone and hang for hours telling jokes or whatever.
Right.
And when you lose somebody like that, it's devastating. And I was just in a funk for a very long time. And I decided, now was the time to relocate. My wife always wanted to move to Florida, which we did. And so when I got down here, there's not, when I got, to Fort Myers, there's not a music scene. I mean, you can go play Margaritaville on the beach with an acoustic guitar, but there's no, it's not New York City, it's not LA, it's not Memphis or Nashville, it's Fort Myers. So I was doing, I was actually doing a fundraiser. I had put together a memorabilia show because I need, I'm one of those guys that needs to create stuff and do things. So I put together this memorabilia show, and I had a lot of really rare stuff from John because I had years and years of stuff in a storage locker, which I still have things from those days. And the guy who was doing it with me, the guy who was curating the rest of the collectibles, a guy named Paul Cola, said, let's use some pictures, some pictures of you and the different guys that you've played with, Eddie Money and whoever else over the years. And I said, sure. So we're looking at my computer, and it's picture, 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 and then all of a sudden a picture of some of my art popped up. And he said, what's that? And I said, it's nothing. It was just, I've created art for as long as I've been playing music. It was one of my childhood passions. And so again, picture, 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 another piece of art showed up. He said, all right, stop. What is this? And I said, well, it's like, I don't know, it's what I do to kind of, come down from a gig or come down from studio or this and that. I said, it's just my art. And he said, have you shown this? And I said, well, my wife has seen it, my mother's seen it. He said, that's not what I mean. Have you ever had it in a showing or a gallery? And I said, no, absolutely not. And so he said, well, let's do a couple of pieces and put them at the memorabilia show. And I said, I don't want to do that because I don't want people to buy my art because it's, I didn't want there to be, any strings attached to it. If you're going to buy something that I created, I want it to be because you love it, not because you're helping out a charity or whatever else. So he said, well, you won't sign them. You won't sign them until after they sell, if they sell. So I said, okay, why not? And I think we had 3 pieces at that show, and they sold on the first day, which I signed them after the show. And he said, you have to join the Naples Art Association, which is, it's the Naples Art Association, which I did. And then I was invited to show at the 48th Founders, whatever it was, a gallery showing, 50 artists, I think it was, and I was one of them. You had to be invited, and I was the first one to sell. And I mean, it just seemed like, wow, out of nowhere. People starve their whole lives as artists, and here I am just having, the luck of the Irish, just selling like crazy. So Paul said to me, you really should do this. You should go to the art shows. You should go and do all this stuff. People love your work, and you should do it. So I did, and I went out and I got all the gear that I needed, for the displays and the whole. It was a whole. It's like, hey, you should be in a band. Well, I'm going to need drums and sticks and and I had like tremendous success with it. It was incredible. I mean, it was just, a blessing. I can't say any other way, because it was something that I did with, the art was something I created with absolutely no agenda. It was something that was fun for me, that I enjoyed doing. And I developed my own technique and my own style over the years. So at one of these shows, Paul said to me, you ought to put this on shirts. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't want a T-shirt with a big plastic piece of my art on the front of it. And I had always been into fashion. My whole family was in the rags business on 7th Avenue in New York, and so I knew quite a lot. And I was always a clothes horse. And I had some Robert Graham shirts in my closet, if you know Robert Graham, the designer. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I want to do something like this. And so over a period of years, I developed this fashion line, and it has been incredibly successful. So that's Steve Luongo Designs. Excellent. And the funny thing about it is, again, Eddie Money. I'd get a call from Eddie, and I'd have this sample that came back from China or from India or whatever, and I'd say, Eddie, you love clothes. I'm going to send you a shirt. And he says, okay, Stevie. And I sent him out a shirt, and he starts wearing them on stage. And he wore them in his television show, and he was on Access TV, and his reality show was Real Money, and it was just crazy. And Buck has them, and Nathan East has them, and Nile Rodgers has them, and Eddie, of course. It was the guys that wear them. It's unbelievable how it happens. So that's what Steve Luongo Designs is, and it permeated out of the art.
Cool, cool, cool. Well, Steve, it was great talking to you, and great chat. Get some history from you. So, would you like to say anything to the fans out there?
Well, the only thing that I would always say is how much I appreciate them still being out there after all these years, or coming in to join the fold, new fans. If it's not for fans, they used to say John Entwistle would play at an opening of an envelope if his fans were there. And
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I mean, I love to connect with the fans. I love the fact that they're out there. And I'm always trying to figure out a way to connect with them. And so basically, thank you for making my dreams come true.
Cool, cool. Thanks a lot for the chat, man.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Great to talk to you. If you want to do it again, you know how to find me.
Yep.
And I look forward to it.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Cheers, man.
Bye-bye.